Okay, so my name is Colin Oriens. I'm the Director of Environmental Studies, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back to the Hope Cunningham Environmental Lectures. If any of you are new, welcome. For those of you returning, welcome back. It's always great to see so many people come and learn about these topics, and I hope that you will come back again. So this series is brought to you through generous donation of a brother-sister alumni who endowed this lecture series, the Hope Cunningham Environmental Lectures, and we're very appreciative for their contributions. There are people online watching, and if you are online, we aren't actually we would encourage you to put questions into the Q&A. We don't have the chat is desactivated. This, along with many, but not all of our other, are recorded, and that means that you can go back if you missed it, or because you want to rewatch it, you can go back and see these talks. And so you can go to our website and learn about our talks and learn about what's coming up in the upcoming semester. We're really excited about this semester's lineup. So there will be a sheet going around, and you can sign up if you want to be receiving notifications about the program or about the lecture series. Before I introduce today's speaker, though, I do want to ask if there are any announcements of upcoming events. And I know we have one, so I'm going to pass the mic.
Thanks, Professor Oriens. So just a quick announcement. This is probably on all of your radars already. So my name is Malaika Solkat. I'm one of the undergraduate career advisors in the Tufts Career Center. Just 3 dates to kind of keep in your mind. So February 9th is our big in-person career fair. It's a little smaller than in the fall. The fall, a lot of employers focus more on full-time jobs, but in the spring, there can be many opportunities for getting internships in different areas. Check your Handshake account for a list of all the organizations. You can sort it by industry. Massachusetts Office for Energy and the Environment is one of the organizations that are coming. We also have Environment America, some construction companies, which also hire for sustainability roles as well. So keep that in mind. Another date to keep in mind, we also have our Sustainability Networking Night, which is coming up February 29th. So again, that is also in your Handshake account. We're going to be working on getting alum and also other professionals from the area. So keep that in mind, and we'll be adding the names of those companies as we secure them. And then if you need help with resumes, cover letters, we also have drop-in hours in Dowling 12 to 2, and also in the JCC on Wednesdays and Tuesdays in the evening. So you can check this on our website. Just Google Tufts Career Center. Thank you.
A wonderful with the Career Center over the years, and we're very thankful for their support, and we encourage you as students to take advantage of them. They're amazing. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. So Sanjana Paul comes to us from MIT. She did her undergraduate at Virginia Commonwealth in engineering, and she has a secret story that she wouldn't tell me about how she ended up getting interested in doing environmental hackathons. So I'm excited to hear the secret story. She's been part of this world of hackathon for quite a while, and part of the reason for creating kind of a central guide is to make it possible for students and others who are interested in doing hackathons to not have to reinvent the wheel every time. So how can we sort of learn and build off of previous efforts and successes? So she's currently a graduate student at MIT in doing a master's degree, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her work. And I should just mention that she actually has been collaborating and working with people here at Tufts, but has never been to our campus before. So please join me in welcoming her to Tufts University.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you so much for the kind welcome. Can everyone hear me? Can we do thumbs ups? Is the mic working? Okay, excellent. Yeah, so really appreciate the kind welcome and really cool to be on Tufts campus for embarrassingly the first time. It's really nice here and I will be coming back. So today I plan to talk a little bit about Earth hacks with a very general sort of overview of hacking the climate crisis and talking about how we can use environmental hackathons as a format and a mechanism to advance justice-centric climate action and climate innovation. So I mentioned Earth Hacks, which is the organization that I co-founded and run. In a sentence, we are an environmental hackathon organization. Our mission is really to help empower hackers to generate innovative and actionable solutions to pressing environmental problems all over the world. And really harness sort of this innovation scaffolding of hackathons to do so. I don't do it alone. Thankfully, I do it with my very blurry friend, Bhargav, who's our innovation director, Camille Mins, who is our deputy director, and she's a Tufts alumna, fun fact, Chelsea and Annie. So, individuality in innovation spaces is often kind of pushed forward, but that's very much a myth. You need a really good team and a really good community. And I'm so grateful that we have that at Earth Hacks. So before I say anything else, I think I should have been keeping count. I've said hackathon between 5 and 8 times now, and I have not asked you how many people have been to a hackathon or know what one is. Can I see a show of hands? Okay, so a couple, and that's okay because we're here to learn and we're here to talk about it. So traditionally, hackathons are programming contests. They have their roots kind of in the open source software movement. Typically, they occurred over weekends. People would go to each other's garages and university spaces and teach each other new programming skills, new languages, new methods, new techniques. They're a really great place for skill sharing and for knowledge exchange. They're a really wonderful type of experiential, hands-on learning and education. And they also provide, in my view, a wonderful opportunity for rapid prototyping and development. So my secret story, which I think was, I'm going to try and make it live up to the hype, was that, as an electrical engineering student, which is what I studied in my undergrad, I used to go to hackathons because I wanted to learn Python because it was not taught in my degree program, which I roast them for to this day because I've used it in every engineering job I've had. And I would go there for these reasons. I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm going to learn, this new programming language. It's going to be super cool. I'm going to get to talk to my friends. I'm going to get, free knowledge, even though I'm in a degree program kind of paying for these classes. And I went there and it was cool, but it also kind of sucked because, while yes, there was this focus on learning, it was very oriented towards these incredibly obtuse computer science programs that only third-year computer science majors who did not care about what was happening in the world around them were interested in. It was only important if you wanted to go and intern at a defense contractor. It was only important if you were there to kind of build up your resume as opposed to actually gain those skills. So I really saw and I really felt the potential of what this could be, if we actually created a platform and a space for hackathons to be these really community-driven, inclusive spaces to engage with issues that are actually happening in the world that we actually live in, that we actually need smart people to be working on. And so that was a large part of the motivation for Earth Hacks is, if hackathons are all of these things, why would we not be harnessing them for maybe the most pressing problem we've ever faced as a species, which is climate change? If we don't figure that out, we don't have a planet to figure everything else out on, what are we going to do? Right. And the thing about climate change is we can totally address it, like 100%, right? But we need to put in the effort and the brain power to actually do so. So today we're going to be talking about kind of two things. I tried to make a very deep metaphor here. Let me know if it worked. We're going to talk about kind of the core of what we do, our guiding principles, our philosophy, why we do a lot of what we do. And I will also give you some examples of what Earth Hacks activities are, because even though I've talked about the word hackathon, I've explained a little bit about them, it can be difficult to get a sense of what's going on without actually seeing examples, which is fair. So why hackathons? Why did we choose to focus on this as opposed to, pushing forward more environmental conferences or something else? Well, hackathons are a very interdisciplinary environment. I was an electrical engineering student, which in a traditional hackathon is interdisciplinary because most of the people there are computer science majors. And environmental hackathons, because every challenge is an environmental challenge, we see English majors, pre-med students, and business students working alongside chemical engineers and computer scientists. They're very democratic and community-centric problem-solving spaces. We've had instances of assistant professors working with high school students on a single team, doing an intergenerational exchange of knowledge, which doesn't happen in more hierarchical settings. They're a hotbed for new ideas, right? You come up with something and say, hey, I want to work on this, and you actually have the time and space to do it. They're time intensive, so there's a focus, right? You give up your weekend. to do it, instead of having to worry about it for 6 months and being like, oh, maybe I'll give 5 hours, maybe I'll give 2 hours. You come for a weekend. And you know what? They have an educational focus. The worst case scenario is still an amazing output, which is that you learn something. I mean, you can't go wrong. It's great. So our theory of change, when I started Earth Hacks, when I was 19 years old, was really this. Hackathons are going to happen anyways, thousands of them every single year at many universities on every continent all over the world. Let's make them environmental. It's such a missed opportunity if we don't. You have people who are smart, driven, and willing to give up their weekends to work on problems. Why would you not put environmental problems in front of them? So that's kind of the first thing that kicked off Earth Hacks. And then as we matured as an organization and actually thought a little bit more about what benefit can we provide to students, we kind of evolved our philosophy and our theory of change a little bit. So a big thing is the focus on students, right? Is that, increasingly being back in school and having the privilege to talk with other students, there is this feeling of environmental anxiety, right? That, we weren't necessarily the generation that created these problems. We're the generation that has to face them, right? We want to give kind of a space for people to share those stories with each other, right? And to actually learn and to have the sense of feeling that they're able to start doing something actionable. And we want to use this as a platform to equip students to become environmental leaders in their own way, whatever that means to them. We really want to embrace and embody a culture shift in the technology space, because as a recovering engineer, this is one of my biggest gripes with the space, is how and why we think about making technology. We really want to use Earth Hacks as an example of what we want to build, which is moving tech philosophy away from being an exploitative measure to a restorative measure, and really focusing on centering environmental justice, which is a phrase that many of our more computer science-oriented hackathon participants have never heard before. And we also really want to tap into the typo, people power. We want to use hackathons to put together prototypes to advance a constellation of environmental projects using the brain power, of people who do end up coming to these hackathons. And so further, I wanted to present some guiding questions that we think about a lot at Earth Hacks that I've found very helpful for myself, and I'd like to offer to you guys as well. When we think about pushing forward environmental progress, we have to think critically about who gets to do that, who gets to be an environmental innovator, right? Who has the time and space to come to a hackathon? Is it people who have care obligations to their families, who are working multiple jobs, who might have health issues? Or is it people who don't have to worry about any of that and can easily give up a weekend? So we have to think critically about who's involved in these spaces. Who bears the cost of innovation? When we manufacture a lot of solar panels, for example, which we desperately need to do to advance the energy transition, who has to extract those raw materials if we scale up production, right? Those are questions that we don't ask when we think about tech development when we think about, climate tech, for example. And we need to, because doing so is the only way we're going to have a robust analysis of how much progress we're making. And then we also want to think about, are we perpetuating the structural status quo? Are we kind of just taking oil, for example, and replacing it with renewables and not actually helping people participate in energy siting decisions, as an example? Are we actually, shifting the status quo in terms of what it means to be in the environmental space to bring more people into that space? So we have to try and grapple with those questions too. So when we set up hackathons, when we talk to students, we really try to use these as guiding questions and think about, are we moving towards answering these in a way that feels helpful to us and to the people that we're working with? So sharing those if they're helpful for you as well. And another concept that we use, which might be a little bit familiar for those of you in policy, is the Overton window. So the Overton window refers to the window of quote unquote acceptable political discourse. What you see is kind of in mainstream policy and legislation. So 10 to 15 years ago, renewable energy was not necessarily in the Overton window, for example. We did not have any federal policy that was advancing renewables at the scale we do today. The Overton window has shifted. We are now talking about renewables in federal policy, is one example. And so we really want to try and shift the engineering Overton window. So instead of just saying, we're going to look at the circuit in front of us and not think about how these materials got to us, we're not going to think about where it's going to go afterwards, we're not going to think about how people interact with it. We want to push people who come to our hackathons to think carefully about this and actually say, no, that is what it means to be a good engineer and innovator, is to think beyond solely the engineering problem that's in front of you, is to think about the broader context. So we want to try and drive that culture shift to say that, if we have a good chance of tackling all of these issues that we face in the 21st century, we're going to need new ways of thinking, and we're going to need new philosophies in how and why we teach engineering, innovation, environmental science, you name it. And so we kind of try to exemplify that in some of the hackathons that we do. So a little bit more on kind of some of the underlying philosophy that we take around environmental innovation as a whole is could kind of be summarized in these 3 points. We really embrace the idea that there are no silver bullets. So silver bullet is a phrase that kind of is a metaphor for oversimplifying a very complex issue and saying there's one solution to it. And that solution is usually technology. So we really emphasize that there's no one thing that's going to fix climate change. There's no one thing that's going to fix environmental injustice. It's a multitude, a spectrum of different solutions and different problems and issues. And we should really be receptive to working with all of them. That ties into the next one, which is kind of a spectrum of solutions. When we work on hackathon projects and challenges with students, of course, we encourage them to brush up their app building skills. Of course, we encourage them to use machine learning algorithms, but we also really encourage them to understand that technology is one aspect of the spectrum of solutions that we have in our toolbox and in our brain power as humans. And we really should be thinking about other things like governance, culture, public participation in moving these things forward, and more. So that's a perspective that's not very present in the hackathon space, we feel. And then lastly, we really champion a thoughtful approach. We want to encourage responsible innovation, again, thinking broadly about the societal context of how and why we are creating things and how and why we are putting them out into the world. And we really want people to encourage, we want to encourage people to think about issues of environmental justice. Because if every problem is an environmental problem, we really have to think about, we really need an environmental justice lens to meaningfully engage with those issues. So kind of getting a little bit more into, part 2, the actual activities that EarthHacks does, I've talked about environmental hackathons, but I haven't talked about what exactly that looks like. And so in the 21st century, right, everything is an environmental problem. Healthcare is an environmental problem, right, because there's relations between public health and climate change. Education is an environmental problem, both in terms of do we have safe spaces to learn and in terms of are we learning about climate change. All of these things are environmental issues. So, I mean, these are just like a sampling of the themes and problem areas that we've engaged with at our events. Because if you can think about something that's an interesting problem, a pressing problem, an important problem today, it probably ties back to the environment in some way. And it's really exciting to be able to make those connections at these events. So to give you some actual examples now as to what environmental hackathons have looked like in the past, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the events we've done previously. So we take a very relational approach to hackathon organizing and hackathon co-creation. EarthHacks is actually, with the exception of like the very first event that kicked off EarthHacks, done like a standalone event. We always partner with someone. And we think that's very important to, again, embrace that community-driven ethos that we really want to push forward. So one example that we did was actually a virtual hackathon at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which was called the Geo-Indigenous Hack for COVID. And so this was a hackathon where we were privileged to support the Group on Earth Observation, GEO, their Indigenous Alliance, in putting together a global online virtual hackathon. So the Geo-Indigenous Alliance came to us essentially saying, we have very strong ties to the lands that we govern, the lands that we are historically from. And that is a large part of how we maintain our culture and share our stories with, younger people in our community. And COVID has made that difficult because we can't see each other. We would be interesting to explore how we could do this digitally. And so we focused on geospatial cultural storytelling. So different Indigenous leaders from the Indigenous Alliance brought forward challenge statements of help us tell the story of this land. Help us tell the story of our relation to this land. Can you build a platform? Can you build a map that helps us communicate this? And we had participants from all over the world join us to do just that. Another event that we did was called the Urban Heat Hack, where we were focused on kind of democratizing heat data for civic action. So we worked with scientists from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory to use data from their eco-stress sensor, which is this little instrument on the International Space Station. And among other things, it collects land surface temperature. And so the group of scientists that we were working with at JPL were kind of frustrated because they were like, we have free data on heat for major cities around the world. Why aren't people bothering their city council members about this and saying, what are you doing to combat urban heat islands? So we essentially had a mapathon where people were, given this eco-stress data. They had to learn how to treat it. They had to learn how to take off like cloud shadows. They had to learn how to resolve for time differences between the data and map a bunch of different cities. And this was actually able to lead to a little bit more engagement with actually council members in a couple of cities. Another event we did was we hosted the only hackathon in the world that was focused on the vaquita, which if you were not aware of it, it's an incredibly cute small dolphin that lives in the one part of the Gulf of Mexico. That is a vaquita. We had an artist create this logo for us, which was wonderful. And they're one of the most critically endangered species in the whole world. They are, I think, as of the last estimate, don't quote me on this, but I think they're like in the single digits. And a large part of their extinction is being driven by human dynamics, by issues around fishing and wildlife trafficking in the Gulf of Mexico region. And so that has human components to it as well. And so we worked with Earth League International. If you have not been kicked off your parents' Netflix account, there are 2 documentaries on there that talk about their work. One is called Sea of Shadows, which is actually about the vaquita, and I recommend watching it. And the other one is called, I think, The Ivory Gang, which is about their work with elephant conservation. So we worked with Earth League International to essentially say, hey, what do you need to, support your work in conserving this critically endangered species? And they came up with a few challenge statements saying, we need a geospatial dashboard for our internal use with these specifications. We need a legal framework for this emerging field of conservation criminology. We need a social media campaign to communicate to people how important this is without scaring them. And that's what we had a hackathon about. So we had computer science and GIS students come and create the dashboard for them, which they were able to use to help their work. We had law students come to the hackathon to draft a legal framework for conservation criminology, which is available online. Happy to share it with anyone who's interested. And we had a few different proposals for, what could a social media campaign look like, focusing maybe on how cute the vaquita is and how important it is to save this animal because it's one of the species that's on our planet. More recently, we hosted Amazonia Hack, which is in its 2nd year. And this is a bilingual hackathon in English and Portuguese focused on conserving the Amazon rainforest. And so we focused a lot on engaging first-time hackers in Brazil, because this ties back to the question of who gets to be an innovator. A lot of hackathons are in English. A lot of people speak 10 languages and maybe not one of them is English. So by hosting this hackathon in a bilingual way, we are actually able to have a ton of first-time Brazilian hackers who've previously felt they couldn't come to hackathons participate and actually participate in this really important work that's happening in their backyard. So we worked with a consortium, you can see some of the logos, a consortium of different organizations in Brazil to, again, get problems from them. What are you guys working on? What do you need support on? What do you want the next generation of Amazon conservationists to be aware of? And so Amazonia Hack continues kind of to be an open innovation event for the Amazon rainforest. Another thing that's kind of outside the realm of hackathons, just to show you, or traditional hackathons, excuse me, just to show you how expansive this format can really be, is we hosted a policy ideathon. So we worked with this environmental justice group called We Act for Environmental Justice to have an event around communicating legislation. So there are 2 policies that were focused around environmental justice issues that were being passed in the state of New York, and they wanted more youth engagement around them. So we had, policy jam sessions, breaks to phone bank, reading legislation and trying to think about how to communicate this jargon to people in their communities, and had this event called Policy for the People last year, focusing on disseminating that information. Last one I'll talk about is actually a slight future thing, is in just a few days, we are having a hackathon on MIT campus in collaboration with Global Energy Monitor, which is a global nonprofit that looks at data for the energy transition, energy systems. So you're welcome to join us. It's very beginner friendly. And basically what we're going to be doing here is tackling some issues that they want to look into but haven't had time to look at around some of their data sets, as well as, again, engaging the next generation, because this is a consistent theme throughout our hackathons, is that the people, the communities, the organizations that we work with are all saying that we don't want to be the last people doing this work. We want people who are worried about climate change. We want young people who have energy, ideas, motivation. We want those people to be doing this work. We want to be there to support them. So really, really big thing to say, again, that goes back to the community aspect, that this is a really great opportunity. In my view, hackathons are a really great opportunity for intergenerational learning and intergenerational collaboration. So I will share these slides with everyone afterwards. If you're interested, we can also talk about it. But those are a few of the different examples of hackathons that we have done in the past. So I'd like to start to kind of wrap up a little bit by talking about one of our other programs, which focuses around environmental justice in technology. And I know I've also said the phrase environmental justice several times. So I want to do like a temperature check. How many people have heard this phrase, engaged with it in their classes or in their organizing before? Okay, yeah, no, this makes sense. So we focus on environmental justice and technology specifically because of the lack of environmental justice and technology. Coming from an electrical engineering background, 4 years of engineering school, I didn't hear climate change once. I didn't hear the word environment once. I certainly did not hear the phrase environmental justice once. And that is very common. When I talk to my other friends who are in mechanical engineering, who are in computer science, it's the same story. And that is a disservice to them because we are growing up in a climate change world. We are going to work in a climate change world, and we need the literacy to be able to understand what's happening around us and engage with those issues. So we hope to try and fill some of those gaps. And we also really, really hope that university departments, apparently like yours is doing great, exposes students to these issues because they're not just theoretical concepts. They are ways for us to understand what is happening in real time around us. So the Environmental Justice in Tech project basically tries to push forward one of those earlier aspects of our philosophy, this really justice-centric culture shift in the tech space. And we want to do this through a collection of tools and frameworks, through educational resources, and through creative projects. So the Environmental Justice and Technology project started out with this blueprint, which was basically us, a bunch of our partners at Earth Hacks, talking about this issue. Our students are asking us questions about environmental justice. They're asking us specific questions. I'm a computer science major. How do I work in an environmental justice space beyond just building a website for a community organization? How do I take the specialized skills that I'm learning and apply them to these issues? And so the blueprint was a topical exploration into 5 areas, including like robotics, geospatial monitoring, energy, kind of talking about what are the overlaps in the work that's happening in this space with environmental justice, and are there overlaps, and kind of what are the gaps? So it's a very initial sort of mapping exercise. That evolved into the first iteration of the Environmental Justice in Tech project, where we really focused on kind of like the creative and educational aspect of it. We created an online zine, which was really fun because it was multimedia. So like someone just like sent in a song and like we included that in the zine. Someone made a comic book, and they were all engaging with these issues that people really, really were struggling to articulate before. But when you connect those 2 dots, it kind of starts to make a little bit of sense. We did a storytelling anthology where we wrote like climate fiction about environmentally just scenarios and environmentally unjust scenarios. We worked with educators to design a toolkit. We came up with environmental justice in tech principles, and we were able to incorporate some of these resources into the hackathon offerings that we had. Most recently, this is the latest iteration of the Environmental Justice in Tech project, where we've continued to grow the resources that we created. And I'm very happy to talk about any aspects of that there, but wanted to kind of focus a little bit more on hackathons today. And there's a QR code for the website if you are curious. So with that, I would like to wrap up because I really hope to have a lot of time for a discussion with you guys, hearing what your impressions are, both about hackathons as a format, environmental innovation, any questions you have. But I'm always really, really glad when there's an interested group of students who are curious about how they can use their skills to drive a more sustainable world. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to go into Q&A now.
So we do have time for questions, so I can bring the mic around to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the presentation.
Yeah.
I was wondering, so there are a couple other sort of hackathons or sort of similar ideas that I've previously engaged with, something, Invent for the Planet or something along those lines. I'm just wondering, like in terms of collaborating with other organizations that are doing or working in the same space, if that's something that you want to speak a little bit about.
Yeah, no, definitely. I can talk a little bit more about our collaborations. So great question. As I mentioned, we're a very community-driven organization. And so all of our hackathons have to happen in collaboration with someone. So I focused a lot on kind of some of our flagship hackathons, but actually the majority of them are student hackathons. So this happens when there's an existing event like Wide Hack at Yale, for example, Cruise Hacks at UC Santa Cruz. And we say, hey guys, great job doing this hackathon. Let's get some environmental themes in there. Or if they already have one, phenomenal. Let's just give you our resources so that you don't have to worry about building it up from scratch. So not only are we open to collaboration, we actively encourage it because we think that resource sharing is very important to kind of help scale up the extent of the adoption of these types of hackathons.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Thorne. I teach at the nutrition school.
Awesome.
I'm curious about the logistics and kind of like what this actually looks like on the ground. You mentioned that they are competitions, so I'm curious about that aspect. And then I also just kind of like, so like, how much paid staff does it take to make one of these work? What other costs are there associated with it? And just kind of like, you know, what does it take to make one happen?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And so I joke with many of our collaborators that the standard Earth Hacks answer is it depends, because it's a very individual sort of situation. But kind of starting backwards and talking a little bit about the logistics and the cost and what it takes to make these happen, it really does vary on the format, who's doing it, how much lead time there is, and what the outcomes are. So we see, especially not that COVID is completely over, but post-COVID, you know, that it varies a lot because now there's the possibility of virtual hackathons. Technically, you could run a virtual hackathon at no cost because when students organize events, they're not paid to do it. We also don't charge them ever to do it because that represents a financial barrier. So you could technically do a hackathon for free if you just did it online, if you didn't have monetary prizes, if it was student organized. If you're doing student organized hackathon in person, the costs vary depending on your operational logistics. Do you have to pay for a space? If you're at a university, hopefully not, because hopefully they support their students enough to let them reserve rooms for free. But you have to pay for food because people are coming for the whole weekend. They are expecting to be there that whole weekend, and they will expect to be fed. Beyond that, it's kind of optional. You know, do you want to provide prizes for people? Do you want to provide T-shirts and quote unquote swag stickers for people? So those costs get taken into account. When we work with organizations, we essentially organize the hackathon for them. And so that is a cost on a sliding scale. We are very different from other hackathon organizations in that we are a part-time organization and we operate on an hourly basis. So we essentially factor in our staff pay time in order to do that. Sliding scale, because we recognize we can't talk about environmental justice and equity without recognizing power dynamics. So large organizations that are in a position to pay, we charge at cost. Other organizations, we scale it down based on, you know, are you a nonprofit? Are you also trying to do fundraising constantly? It's not ethical for us to charge you. Are you a community organization that doesn't make any money? It's not ethical for us to charge you. So it depends on kind of those different constraints. So it's very much on a case-by-case basis, but I would like to note that our sliding scale approach to it is a little bit unique because there are organizations that exist out there that are essentially hackathon consulting organizations, which will charge you at the same rate that like consultants would. What it takes to make it happen, we recommend a minimum organizing team of 3 people, and we actually will not work with hackathons if it's only 1 person or 2 people. We help them find other people, but it's a lot of work. And so, you know, when we work with organizations, we have our staff of 5 people kind of at their disposal, but teams can get as big to, you know, up to like 20 people, depending on what it is that you're trying to do. So it's a big spectrum, but I would just say that kind of like the baseline is it's a big commitment, treat it that way.
I have 2 questions. So first of all, like the business model of Earth Hacks, you
Yeah.
kind of explained it.
Mhm.
But for the leadership,
Yep.
it sounds like you're volunteering your time as opposed to, you know, fundraising to sort of be able to grow.
Mhm.
And so could you talk a little bit about
Sure.
sort of the extent to which you're fundraising? And then I have my second question is really more like topical, which
Yeah.
is a lot of times in the environment, you hear the slang jobs versus the environment.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to say jobs and the environment. And now I want to say after your talk, jobs, environment, and tech.
Uh-huh.
So I'm wondering, have you ever done a hackathon on messaging around jobs and the environment?
Mhm.
What did that look like and what kinds of things might have come out of it?
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with your first question, then I'll take your second. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we operate on a fee-for-service and philanthropy model. So I actually do spend a decent amount of my time fundraising to be able to cover the cost of our programs, and very importantly, to keep our hackathons free for students. Because the minute you put a financial barrier in front of students, it becomes inaccessible to them. And we don't want to do that because we were student hackathon organizers, and we recognize that. So we pay our staff not as well as I would like on an hourly basis for part-time work weekly. And so our business model has kind of those components that we do a fee for service when we work with large organizations. We take philanthropic dollars based on our 501c3 status. And then we also have actually a couple of programs that we're spinning up to be able to bring in a little bit more sustainable revenue, because we are starting to realize that people are interested in this, and maybe we should become a real organization and go full time. So we're in a little bit of a transitional phase there. To your second question about jobs, we have not had a hackathon specifically around green jobs because every single one of the things that we've done at these hackathons is a green job. And so we kind of really focus on, you know, get the experience and actually go into that space. So we've had students come and shift their entire career trajectories after participating in hackathons. We had, for example, a student I'm still in touch with who's studying computer science, who was going to take a position as a software engineer at a health insurance company after graduation. She was like, it's a stable job. I need to support my family. I like coding. It's fine. She came to our Urban Heat Island hackathon. She talked to the scientists at NASA JPL and realized that they need software engineers to do data wrangling for earth science. That's what she does now. So we really try and focus kind of on embodying that. Come here, learn about these skills, realize that you have something to contribute, and then we push them towards resources like Green Jobs Board, which everyone check out Green Jobs Board. It's great. That can actually provide them the resources and the job opportunities that they might be interested in. But we are definitely open, if we work with an organization that is interested in exploring those questions, to having an event around, yeah, sure, how do we maybe have a hackathon around communicating green jobs better to people and just explaining that actually every job is a climate job, because everything is an environmental problem and everything is the environment. So open-ended answer to that question, because I think it's something that we could do. And I also think that, we do take the approach that every job is a climate job. Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Hi.
So Javier's asking, amazing to see hackathons moving in the direction of environmental and sustainable problems. Do any of the solutions made during the hackathon get funded? Are there any success stories that you could share?
Yeah, thank you. So we kind of have a little bit of segmentation in our model, in that we have those student hackathons and we have those organizational hackathons. And with the organizational hackathons, actually our focus is pushing forward that constellation of environmental projects. So when we work with these organizations, the plan is for them to use the output and the results from the event. So rather than kind of hoping that students have 6 months of free time to join an accelerator and maybe get something off the ground, we go in with a guarantee that actually these projects will be used by this organization. That being said, it's not like we discourage our students from doing so, right? We actively encourage them, keep working on your projects. That could be iterate on and refine them. That could be, this is the thing you do after school. That could be you pass it on to someone else and they grow it. And we have had a couple of projects, really take off and turn into different things. So one example is at a different event in Vision 2050, which was an ideathon we did with Arizona State University's Global Futures Lab around the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the teams there essentially came up with a proposal for a building decarbonization company. Embarrassingly, I can't remember the name, but I can get it to you. And it was 2 graduate students, and they actually incorporated the company. And last I heard, we're still working on it. So we have had some stuff spin out, quote unquote, from these events into something real. But we also think that all of these educational projects are something real, because they're the first step for people to actually go into the space and keep on working in this space for the rest of their lives, or as long as they want.
Just a quick follow-up, because you said that you work with students and then sometimes you work with community or sort of organizational partners. Can you describe a little bit more what a student-facing one looks like and how it's different than working with GEM or with the tribal group?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's all in who's organizing it. So students come to all of our hackathons. They're open to everyone. But with student hackathons, we work with 19-year-old hackathon organizers at college campuses all over the world. We don't only support the United States. I failed to mention this. We also work with hackathon organizers in Germany, in India, in Brazil, and other countries. And with organizational hackathons, we do the organizing. So it's entirely in terms of the logistics of making the hackathon happen. The output is the same.
Hi, first of all, I really enjoyed your presentation, so
Thank
thank you. I was wondering, you spoke about policy for the people, and I'm curious to know whether that was in intergenerational space, and if so, what were the dynamics you noticed in both ideation and just how these ideas were approached between generations?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'll say kind of all of our hackathons are intergenerational, because we do have people coming in as mentors, as speakers who have experience. But yes, policy for the people, we had a couple of state legislators come to the event and speak to students. And it was really cool to kind of see that, they shared the approach that like, this is something we've been working for because we grew up facing these issues and we became legislators in order to do something about it. And the students present at the event were like, oh, that's a pathway for me, I guess. Or, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that could be a motivator to get into policy. So it was interesting to kind of see, I think, people's perceptions of like the builds that we were there to talk about, and also their perceptions and how it would be helpful to communicate it. You know, there was definitely a lot more focus on people asking, like, should we use TikTok? You know, like with the younger generation, and you know, kind of the more experienced people were talking about maybe more quote unquote tried and true organizing tactics and community engagement tactics. So it's really cool to just see, you know, how people's upbringing and experiences influence their perception of what would be helpful in communicating these policies. It's a great question.
Thank you so much. This was super informative. I also have two questions. The first one is, what makes a good question to be solved or tackled by a hackathon?
Yeah.
And the second question is about the people who answer these questions.
Mhm.
How do you, because this is open to everybody,
Mhm.
and I don't think there is any selection process.
Mhm.
So how do you make sure that the people who are solving these questions have the knowledge to answer and to turn this into something that is really meaningful
Yeah.
and that is going to work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually, I feel they're two sides of the same question. So I'm glad you asked them together, because I'll kind of answer them together. So first, in terms of what makes a good hackathon question, we have a very collaborative approach with our partners to figure that out. For hackathons that are organized by students, our central guiding question is transformative education. Is this going to be something interesting, engaging, and informative for students who come to this event? Is this going to be something different maybe from what they've seen before? Is this going to allow them to really deeply engage with one specific environmental problem to grow their knowledge? So that's kind of the criteria when we work with students, is that we really want to provide a good educational experience rather than a very general create an environmental project. You know, we want to come up with something like, look at the California wildfires from last summer and see what insights you can derive in communicating it to your family, you know? And then we have very, very specific projects. So that's kind of for the student side. For the organization side, when we're co-organizing with different groups, it's a very iterative process of, what are you guys interested in? Why did you want to have a hackathon in the first place? Is it because of a pain point that you're facing as an organization, or is it because of a desire to engage more deeply with more people? Very often it's both, right? Because if they really just had one pain point, they would likely try to hire a consultant or an intern rather than taking a hackathon process. And then we go back and forth. They give us that initial thing and we give them feedback that, you know what, this is great, but it's too broad to say we want to save the species at a hackathon. Let's focus a little bit more. What are the two things that we could do here that would really help push forward your work to save the species? And keep on going back and forth until we arrive at a good balance that this is very specific. The potential output from it is achievable, but it is still interesting, engaging, and informative, and kind of pulls in on that community engagement aspect. So it's unique in each case, but those are sort of like the guiding sets of questions that we ask. In terms of, you know, how we guarantee a good output, that's kind of the thing with, I think, innovation as a whole. And I appreciate that there's like kind of like a critical lens on hackathons for this, but that's also true for like startup incubators. How do you know that the people going into that are actually going to be good at what they do and the startup isn't going to fail? Because most startups do fail, right? There's a little bit of that gamble of like, we open the door for people who aren't typically included in these spaces to be a part of the innovation process. And that could deliver a thing that, you know, none of us could have ever thought of. There is also the possibility that we'll kind of just walk away from this with education, and that we won't walk away with this from this with like a complete geospatial dashboard, for example. So there is that balancing act that when we talk with the organizations we work with, we are very explicit about that, right? That you should want to do this both because you want to solve a problem and because you have this desire for increased student engagement, for maybe recruiting interns, for doing something in the future. Because if you want, you know, someone to develop you a research grade machine learning algorithm for logging detection, you should hire a graduate intern to do that. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. But when we try to recruit for hackathons, if we really, really want to have like one or two specific outcomes as opposed to a range of possibilities, we advertise very specifically. We advertise saying we want graduate students who have a background in XYZ to please apply for this hackathon. And if we, you know, with the GEM hackathon, for example, we say it would be cool if graduate students with XYZ experience came, but we really want to engage with more students. So everyone come, because we want to see what you can create. So that was a very multidimensional answer, but it kind of has evolved also as we've grown and as we've learned from the outputs of our previous hackathons, how we engage with organizations and kind of what we say we can offer them.
So thank you so much for your talk. I was really interested when you mentioned like an ideathon or like a group of, I think you mentioned like law students who are working on a policy proposal. So I was wondering if you could talk more about what entails an ideathon or potentially like deliverables that are not like a map or a website or a geospatial dashboard. Like what do sort of non-coding based deliverables, what might they look like in this sort of hackathon model?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And so I know I did say we have done ideathons and stuff like that in the past. I personally, and my staff and I talk about this a lot, I personally still prefer to use the word hackathon because I say it's an innovation framework. And also I really push back against, in our philosophy, I really push back against kind of what I believe is a false binary of technical and non-technical problems and solutions, right? Because in the environmental space, take building a solar plant, for example. Yeah, you need engineers to scope out the space, to design it, to understand how it's going to connect to the grid. But you also need policymakers, community buy-in, mediation, dispute resolution. So environmental problems are multifaceted and have both technical and non-technical components. So, but we do have regularly challenge statements that, kind of expect an output that's not necessarily coding based. So what that looks like is, the legal aspect of it is hugely useful, right? I will be honest, I am not well versed in law, right? It's a really, really big, difficult undertaking. And so that's one output, is kind of thinking a little bit about like law and policy, creating policy proposals, things like that. Another is business plans or operational plans, right? Is if you're going to build, for example, a community garden, write out the implementation plan. If that's your solution to, or your project in response to like the challenge statement, write out what is the time frame, who all do you need, like show us you thought about this problem and how you would actually make it a reality. Another is communications, right? Environmental storytelling is a very powerful tool, very important tool in kind of getting the word out about these issues. So it can be things actually like social media campaigns, explaining why you chose certain branding graphics to, communicate things, why you chose certain colors. So it really is like a multitude of things. And I think if I continued, I would list on just like, other jobs and things that people do. But there's a lot of possibility to work on something having no experience coding. And there's also a lot of opportunity to work with people who have experience coding and not doing anything else, and kind of like helping them make their project more robust and like being able to work together and learn from each other. That's a really good question, because I think that especially when you say the word hackathon in that space, the value of those types of projects sometimes gets overlooked.
Thank you so much. That
Yeah.
was really wonderful. I can't help but think I have a new appreciation for hackathons. I've never been part of one, but you're learning, you're creating community, you're getting skills that will help you define what you may or may not want to do. You may discover in the process that you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I love the community piece of it.
Yeah.
And so I've always encouraged students to do group projects.
Mhm.
It's really hard sometimes to do group projects. And so this is a great way of doing it with an opportunity to sort of be having a similar goal together.
Definitely.
You sound like a startup. Earth Hack sounds like a startup. And I'm wondering if you're leveraging your masters to help it move from startup phase to more permanency. Is that the goal of your masters at MIT?
That's a great question. I was actually just talking about this with Patrick before I came here. Patrick is a student here at Tufts. He's great. So yes and no, because I think that, my goal really is to just kind of like enable environmental progress and really contribute to the fight against climate change. And Earth Hacks does that. And what I study in my master's degree, which is actually environmental policy and planning, also does that, And so I think that going into this space for me is really filling in the blanks of my education as an engineer. It's very healing. Is that I really resented how narrowly focused we were solely on kind of, again, the circuit in front of us and not the broader context of how the materials for that circuit got there, the environmental impact of those materials, what impact it will have after it leaves the table in front of me. And so focusing on, specifically environmental policy and planning has allowed me to start to engage with a lot of those questions and has informed the pedagogy of Earth Hacks, right? Because it started from a frustration, again, with how limited we were in engineering spaces and innovation spaces and what we consider innovation in the climate world. And so it's informed me in that perspective to kind of think about, how can we make our pedagogical model at Earth Hacks more robust to really upskill students with the skills they actually need for the 21st century. It is also, helpful in terms of learning implementation skills, right? Policy and planning. So yeah, there's definite, feedback and communication between the two. But I think for me, I very much see them on kind of two parallel tracks of, I want to be useful and provide service to the world. And, enabling environmental progress, I think, is really what we need in this time. And so I see them as very, very complementary things, not necessarily one feeding directly into each other, but a very, very good sort of way to cross-pollinate between different ideas, different approaches, and take learnings from one and apply it to another. So I hope that ultimately, our community and our staff agrees that it was in service of pushing this organization forward. So kind of, yes.
Well, thank you. We're at time, but let's give her a big hand and thank her for coming to us.